Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, wherever you are joining us from. I am Dr. I'm the Literature in Judaic Studies at Fordham University and the co-director of its Center for Jewish Studies, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to today's discussion of a remarkable short film by Miriam Lewin, Commandment 613. In 2021, when the high holidays came very early in the semester, we organized a virtual screening of another remarkable Emmy-nominated short film by Alan Oren, 18 Voice Sing Kol Nidre. It was a moving way to ease us into the season of reflection. Then the following year, we hosted a conversation about the etrog, and last year, a beautiful exhibit of stained glass designs for restituted synagogues in independent Ukraine by Evgeny Kotlyar, which of course featured gorgeous design reflecting Jewish holidays. So it is quite fitting to view Miriam Lewin's film this year as the high holidays are approaching. And it is a great honor for me to have you all with us and to share with you this very distinguished panel of speakers. So without further ado, let me introduce the speakers. We were welcoming Rabbi Kevin Hale, whose work includes evaluating and restoring Torah scrolls, writing megillot and mezuzot, and teaching about Judaism's sacred scribal traditions. He follows in the footsteps of his teacher, Rabbi Dr. Eric Ray, also a scribe authorized to repair the Czech Torah scrolls of the Memorial Scroll Trust, now loaned to the communities around the world. He is a deeply curious thinker, and he invents musical instruments and makes recordings without electricity and bakes his own matzah. Miriam Lewin is the producer and director of the film Commandment 613. Miriam has made documentary shorts on topics ranging from housing discrimination in Georgia to the 50th anniversary of undergraduate co-ed singing at Yale. She also writes and produces radio programs on classical music. Miriam's first career was in opera administration, and she manages the world's premier collection of opera supertitles. Our third panelist is Lois Roman, who is a trustee of the Memorial Scrolls Trust, a London-based nonprofit that has a collection of Czech Torah scrolls that survived the Holocaust. She's also the founder and coordinator of Learn to Lead, an advanced training for Holocaust and genocide executives. And this global seminar sits at the intersection of business and Holocaust studies. It is an interdisciplinary practical course designed for executive training of future leaders in the field. Lois holds an MA in Holocaust and Genocide Studies from the Fish Center at Yeshiva University, has an MBA from the Columbia Business School, and a BA from Brandeis University. Our fourth panelist is Julie Seltzer, who is also a Sofer, a scribe and educator with a background in theater arts. She has been transcribing and repairing scrolls since 2009, and she was a scribe in residence at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco. A video of this project can be found at a site which I will share with you later. Julie leads educational workshops in person and virtually, offering a glimpse into the world of sacred scribal arts. And her hand is featured on Sefaria website, which, if you don't know, I highly recommend as a resource. Our conversation today will be moderated by Rabbi Katya Vilov, who is the newly appointed director of Jewish life at Fordham, and she's a trained hospital chaplain, a JTS ordained rabbi, and she taught as a faculty member at the University of South Carolina, Columbia in religious studies, as well as in the Jewish studies program. Katya Filov grew up in Germany and lived in the UK and Israel before coming to the US, and she now lives in our city in New York with her family. Just a few, if I hand over the screen, a few remarks. If you have questions or comments, place them in the Q&A section of the screen. And I hope that you will join us next week on Monday, September 30th at 6 p.m. for the book launch of Jessica Roda's book For Women and Girls Only, Reshaping Jewish Orthodoxy Through the Arts in the Digital Age. And since Jessica's book is about arts, we will be joined by Malky Goldman, an actor, artist, and a writer who is known for her performance in The Vigil, the performance Unorthodox, the Binding of Isaac and Castles, and by Ricky Rose, a Yiddish singer, songwriter, and entertainer, and a chazan who grew up in the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic community in Brooklyn and who will perform after the lecture. All programs that we offer are open to everybody, to the Fordham community, to the public, and they are made possible by the generosity of this Fordham, the Friends of the Fordham Center for Jewish Studies. So without further ado, welcome to this webinar, and the screen is yours.
Thank you for the introductions, Magda. Hi from New York. I'm so glad to be here with all of you today. And I want to start out our conversation with a question to all of you. I've been really intrigued by the title of this just wonderful meditative documentary, Commandment 613. Now, traditionally, of course, the Torah is thought to hold 613 mitzvot or commandments, but what does the title mean to you? Let's maybe begin with you, Miriam.
Well, the minute Kevin, Rabbi Hale, told me what he did and that there were 613 commandments and that the last one was the commandment to write this scroll for yourself, I thought, okay, Commandment 613, that's a very intriguing title, and that would be the title of the film. And I got a lot of pushback from a lot of people who said it sounded like a spy movie or, a thriller. And we went through all sorts of other titles, and I finally realized, oh, that's the title.
Thank you. How about what did some of the other panelists think of the title? I mean, maybe Kevin or some of the others.
Yeah, I remember when we were going over the title, I was a craftsman a long time ago and a toy maker. And I think I was even quoted saying I got really interested in sacred craft. And over 30 years ago, looked at that list of mitzvot, and there's different ways in which they're numbered. And there's the parting shot, which says, really do this yourself. So I was all behind your choice of the title.
Thank you. Thank you. Do any of our other two panelists want to chime in here?
I think I'll just chime in by saying that having the 613th commandment be the necessity of writing your own scroll is completely out of reach for me personally. And I'm so happy that I got to meet the Soferim that we work with, a Memorial Scrolls Trust. And having been in a room where Kevin has been finishing a scroll where either he or the rabbi in attendance is forming that last letter with the feather pen, and we are all touching each other and touching the scribe as they do that, is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And when I hear the title 613, I think about those moments.
Thank you. Thank you. Julie, did you want to say something? No.
Sure.
Kevin.
Away. So when I think of 613, I think of one, and I think of the mitzvot that bookend all of the mitzvot. The first mitzvah is pru urvu, be fruitful and multiply. And I remember, especially when I wrote my first Torah scroll, thinking about how it was very much like a birthing process. Not that I have given birth, but I have given birth now to 4 Torah scrolls, and just this labor of love that goes into it, and everything, everything about that process that is both difficult, challenging, but also ultimately rewarding.
Thank you. Kevin, for you as a scribe, what does it mean for you when you're done with all this, when you see community members engaged with their now restored Torahs, when you're writing letters, when they're leaning on you, when you teach them, what is that like?
I have to start with just sort of to continue maybe what Julie was saying, that a lot of my work is focused on these particular very old Torahs that have been through a lot, and when they're brought back into compliance with Jewish law, my sound check was to say 304,805, that every one of the 304,805 letters is there and legible, and it is among other things like a rebirthing. And it connects all of us together, it connects us back, it connects us forward. So I'm just imagining 250 years from now that there's a scribe talking about the experience of restoring a Torah that Julie wrote. And I know something of the level of craft that is very possible, that there would still be a scroll that is restorable at that point. So just the reaching across time and space is really exciting.
Yeah. I have many questions when I watch the documentary about memory and material culture. Louis, you're a trustee at the Memorial Scrolls Trust, that looks after these Torah scrolls and these very physical reminders of a time. And these scrolls are basically microhistorical sources, documents. Each of these Torahs embodies so many stories. The stories of their own communities, of the communities that cherished them, that carried them around, that opened them, that read them. And at the same time, of course, each Sefer Torah, each scroll creates a direct connection to the Shoah, to the Holocaust, through these Nazi collectors who collected them for whatever purposes. And then, of course, also the people who host them today. And all of this is connected. What does it mean for you? Maybe that's a question really for all of you, but let's start it with you, to work with these Torahs and to tell their stories.
It's a tremendous honor to work for the Memorial Scrolls Trust and to meet all of the amazing custodians of our collection all around the world. So the collection itself is 1,564 scrolls that survived the Shoah by being collected in Prague after 1,000 years of Jewish history in that area. They were put away. The bombs didn't destroy Prague. They were then moved under the communists to the outskirts of Prague and put away in an empty, abandoned building for 20 years. And then they were sent to London, and then London received letters from all over the world, and the trust fixed up the scrolls as best as we could. Most are not kosher, and were sent out as memorials and objects for remembrance all around the world. So joining an organization like that is amazing. And a little known fact that even Miriam and Kevin don't know about me is that when I was 11, I wanted to be an archaeologist. And of course, my life went forward and I never accomplished that goal. But I find artifacts completely fascinating because the word artifact comes from Latin, and it's a compound word that means art and fact. And when you look through that lens, it changes what you see. So these Torah scrolls are artifacts from life in Europe, from Jewish life in Europe, and from the Holocaust. They are beautiful works of art, from the calligraphy to the carving of the wooden Etz Chaim to the way the pages are sewed together. And just on that surface, you can look at them and say, wow, this is amazing. And there are ritualistic letters in these scrolls that are not scribed today in Torah scrolls. But it's also factual. It's an object that you can touch, not the parchment, but the wooden holders. And it reminds us that there really was an enormous Jewish civilization in Europe for a very long time. And the towns where these objects were used no longer have Jewish communities. And so when I go to the current day communities that are caring for these scrolls, and I see them, as you saw in the movie, being carried around, being welcomed back in under the chuppah, being in the ark, it is just a moving and an amazing emotional experience.
Thank you. I just want to add on that while Jewish life in the Czech Republic is, yes, small, of course, there is vibrant Jewish life in Europe today still as well. But yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
I just like to add, I think a lot of people are familiar with the Stolpersteine, the stumbling blocks that are in, I don't know, 27 countries now in front of the last residence of choice of a particular person who was persecuted, affected by the Holocaust. And I've come to think, that's what's called a decentralized memorial. So it's all over the place and you literally stumble across it. But I've come to think of these scrolls, which are all over the place, as a different kind of decentralized memorial, one that has life to go into the future. But you get to a synagogue and you say, oh, here's one of these, and it makes me think of that community. And there are other decentralized memorials. There are some in New England for slaves. There are some in Argentina for people who were disappeared. There are some in Moscow. Anyway, I'm very intrigued by this idea of memorials that you don't know where you're going to find them.
Yeah. Yeah, I was touched in the documentary when this girl, pre-bat mitzvah girl, got up and she says, you know, when I have my bat mitzvah, I want to read from this scroll because this is meaningful. It's moving. Yeah. And I was wondering, I wish I could ask her and say, oh, what's moving about it? Tell me more.
I'll send you the whole transcript if you want of her interview.
You know, I'll chime in because sometimes ask, you know, well, what's your favorite moment? And often that very moment comes to me, and it's kind of circular because she says, it would be cool to read this Torah because it's cool. And, you know, it's kind of beyond explanation that it's just that compelling. And I would like to, I mean, she's probably in high school now, but I would like to ask her, you know, how does she reflect on that? Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe connected to this, as time goes on and as there are fewer and fewer sort of living, let's say, human survivors left from this time, what does it mean for us to have these Torahs today?
I just will chime in on Holocaust education. It is so important, especially in today's world, that we're educating our children about intolerance. And these Torahs can serve that purpose, whether they're housed within a synagogue or a museum or a library, or brought out into the community during Holocaust Education Weeks in the US. Our scrolls are across the world as well. And I think that they should be used. Kids need something they can see. So they used to be able to sit in front of a survivor and hear their accented words about what happened to them. And a video is nice. A lot of the recordings are wonderful, but it's a very different concept when you can stand around a table and see the scroll open and have somebody tell you its story. And these scrolls are survivors too. So they were collected, they were numbered and cataloged, they were put away in really bad conditions. And for the most part, their ending was different. They survived. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to use them to teach.
Yeah, I'm a trained historian, so when I think about these texts or these material, just the materiality of them, I think of the communities and the people who wrote them and the people who used them as well. And when you say the Torah survived, I think maybe not the actual community survived, but something of the spirit of the communities is with us when we take out these Torahs, when we talk about them, when we're here together and talk about them as well. Yeah.
I'll just add one other thing, that the Torah scroll is something that binds together 3 major religions in the world. So it's obviously the Jewish Torah scroll, the most sacred item that we have, but it's also the Old Testament in Christianity, and it's the 5 books of Musa for the Muslims. And I think that statement doesn't get talked about enough, that there's a commonality for many of us, and it's all housed within these Torah scrolls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So we have the great honor of having not just one, but 2 scribes on this panel today. And Kevin speaks in Commandment 6:13 about his path to the craft. But Julie, I'd like to invite you to talk a bit about what it means for you to have become a scribe, and how do you get there?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much. It's such an honor to be part of this panel and to see this incredible film and to learn about the work of the Memorial Scrolls Trust. I don't work specifically on the Holocaust scrolls. I was trained first to do new writing, and now I've since, in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, focused primarily on repair. And I do work on some older scrolls. I had the opportunity to work on a scroll from the mid 1700s, we think, which is a pretty old scroll. And it's interesting. My path to this work also had a lot to do with this idea of memory, and of materiality extending to the past and to the future. So I always loved Hebrew, and I always loved the language. So I think that was kind of my intellectual interest. And at the time that the idea to learn the calligraphy, essentially, that is required for sacred writing, this idea popped in my head seemingly out of nowhere. But at that time, my mother was very sick. She'd been diagnosed with late stage lung cancer. And I know that this had a deep impact on me and this chosen path. I think that I was looking for not only something that was a discipline that was very focused and quiet and not chaotic, but also because I was facing, her mortality, not only hers, which of course brings up our own and everyone else's. And through this work, there was this possibility of tapping into something that goes back in time, that really goes back in time, and that would also continue on into the future. And Kevin, I was so touched when you said maybe a scroll that I wrote will be repaired, 250 years in the future. And I that's just very moving idea for me, because it's difficult to pass on information through the generations, right? To pass any message along. I barely know anything about my grandparents, let alone my great grandparents, and yet we have this essential document that has been passed along through the generations and through the ages, and that hopefully will be passed along into the future. It's really a miracle, and I get to be part of that transmission.
Yeah. Julie and Kevin, what does it mean for each of you to be a scribe in the 21st century, in a world that's maybe very different for scribes than it maybe was 100 years ago even?
Wow. When let's go back to sort of the moment that I got hooked, which was just learning about this mitzvah in rabbinical school, actually, and asking the librarian, I want to learn more about the writing of Torah. And he said, well, I'll direct you to some primary sources. But he said, you should know that no one ever asked me that question before. So how is it that the world of scribes became distanced from I would say most Jews across the spectrum, even in the more traditional communities? And once upon a time, you could be any kind of Jew living in New York City, completely, your religion was communism or whatever. And yet there was a scribe, a couple of blocks away who was at work. And so there is something very countercultural. We are we're kind of been doing this about 25 years, and over that time, there's been a renewed appreciation in craft and doing things by hand, and even old things that survive. So we're kind of part of a very ancient movement, which is we never stopped writing Torah. And as thrilling as it is that these are scrolls that connect way back, to me, it's just as thrilling that scrolls and writing is Torah is being written today. But there's something amazing about figuring out, everywhere that we've lived over thousands of years, we've written Torah, and I think the economics of it have been very challenging. But even here, we could see that there's a value in, engaging in this very primal act of writing Torah. So, we're in a really new era in which the acceptance of women as scribes is really new. And, it's, this is not the first time that in Jewish history we've had something new phenomenon, and whether it takes a long time or a short time to assimilate. And I think that there's some sense of momentum actually about we could do this too. So
thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what you just said. I mean, it's quite anachronistic to write anything by hand. I mean, who even writes their grocery list by hand anymore? I don't. I type it into my phone. Oh, okay. I stand corrected. We have a few handwritten grocery lists here, but in an age where so much is mechanized, the idea that we would devote so much time and so much care to writing something by hand and making something by hand is it's pretty extraordinary. And of course it wasn't initially, it was just that's how we wrote. I mean, it wasn't any different from how anything else was getting written. But at this point, because we have not changed that practice, it stands, as you said, Kevin, countercultural. And it's kind of like you heard the slow food movement. This is like the slow Torah movement. And I think that because so much care goes into making it, it elevates kind of the care that we have towards the scroll and towards its contents. And also, yes, I do think there's momentum for more and more women and folks that are not in the Orthodox world in general that are starting to learn this craft. And yeah, I've seen it even just in the 15 years that I've been doing this. Many more people, many young people are interested and curious and learning.
Can I add a question for the Sofer? It's so amazing to me that you spend nearly a year of your life or more writing a scroll from scratch, checking it, laboring over it, and yet as a work of art, you're not allowed to put your name on it. And once it's finished, it's given to a community and it's anonymous. And I wonder, one, how that makes you feel, and two, if you think that links back to the idea of tzedakah and the concept that tzedakah given anonymously is the highest form.
That's so interesting. I've never heard that before. I personally love this idea of the anonymity of it. These are, this is not a work, this is not creative writing. This is not, a work that I come up with, though I like to joke about it when people say, I'm a writer. I say, what do you write? Oh, only the most famous, the broken Western, civilization. But this is a shared scroll. It's not, it's not something that I created. It's not something that I feel that I need, some kind of credit for. But I had never thought about, I have to formulate thoughts about the tzedakah thing. I haven't heard that before. So Kevin, maybe you have some thoughts that have developed in this last minute or two.
No, I was Lois, that was great. You got both of us like wowed by okay, I'm starting with there, but so if the highest level of tzedakah is unknown who's giving and who's receiving, it's like it's lishma, it's a mitzvah for its own sake. And we want to be remembered. I'd like to be remembered for a long time, and we want the communities that these scrolls came from to be remembered. And then ultimately, very little is remembered, and yet things live on. So in some ways, it's just that's beautiful. I'm sorry, Lois, that was really memorable. There's something really pure about not having a name. So I and Julie and I met at a cafe about, I don't know, almost 50, no, not 15 years ago, but at least 10 years ago, in Berkeley, where we both used to live at different times, I guess. And I was so excited to meet Julie. She was writing Torah and writing new Torah and in public. And if I may, I think you were excited to meet me because I was working with really old Torahs and immersed in diversity of scripts. And, when I write, I am reproducing a panel from an old damaged Torah, and I am following the tradition of my teacher. I'm trying to be a forger. And, success is if the script that I write really matches well what already exists. So, where was I going with this? So, and sometimes my work is to remove extraneous writing that's been put into a Torah on the back or the front. And there's something very powerful about Torah's, I wish I knew the source of this, but that until the Torah is completed, it's really the work of the scribe. And then when it's completed, it really takes on its own identity. And long ago, when the first, it was a women's Torah writing project out of Seattle was happening, and I was asked to give an opinion, which is because women had not been known to write kosher Torahs up to that point, should they, out of respect for traditional communities for whom that might be problematic, have some notation on the back? And I said two things. One is we don't have a tradition of Torahs having anything but the letters, but also it's kind of putting an asterisk on the legitimacy of the Torah. And when we are repairing so one thing I learned we have in common, Julie, is we both restore Torahs that could be 250 years old. We don't stop and inquire and do our research on ancestry.com about, can we figure out who was the scribe and what was their gender? That once the Torah is presented to the world and accepted as a Torah, it is, and we kind of proudly can step back unless there's a problem. I don't know what the original question was, but we're we are getting to do what we had hoped for, which is a little geeking out scribally. Yeah.
Thank you. So I personally love hearing more about scribe from you, from the scribes and scribal arts, and hearing about how you think about these things, because I never hear about this. And I was wondering if any of our other panelists had any questions for our scribes.
So maybe
Yeah,
I'll jump.
I'm curious about handwriting. I'm sorry, Magda. I'm curious about handwriting, particularly for Julie, when you set out to write a whole new Torah, or Kevin, when you're asked to write a megillah or a ketubah. How do you decide what handwriting to use, what script to use?
Kevin, do you want to go first? You probably are deciding more often than I am what script to write in.
Yeah. Wow. So that's such a great question, and it depends what's the setting. If I'm when I'm repairing, either a section of a column that's worn off, I'm really trying to sort of famous story about my teacher, Eric Ray, who was a genius calligrapher and smuggled into Dachau after the war when it was a DP camp, and he was forging papers so the British, survivors could get into Palestine. He was forging. So I try to really pay attention to letters, and along with always wanting to be an archaeologist, and really, Lois, we have to talk, fascinated with letters and the variations and typography. When I once got to write a new panel for a Spanish Portuguese Sephardic Torah, and that was so exciting because one of my great grandfathers belonged to a synagogue that used that script. So it's you get into a somewhat of a unique, I don't know, emotional state when you're writing a particular style of writing. And having said all that, I have somewhat of a standardized script of my own, and it's fairly Ashkenazi with a little bit of Sephardic, which matches my background. And here and there you can bring something in. I've written a few gets, which is a very formalized, what's the word, divorce document, and there are particular letters that actually are extended in this form of writing. So, you can learn a lot about a culture by how it holds its pen and how it makes those marks. So we are living in a world that, doesn't have the incredible diversity of script that existed just 100 years ago. And, in some ways, this was an experiment I did recently of, if we were to develop a sort of standard script in this country where very few Torahs were written, what would it look like? In Eastern Europe, the scripts got to develop organically since before we had printing. So I think, Julie, your script that is in 4 Torahs could really inform what might become, God willing, one day a standard American style of writing. I think I said enough. Julie?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we definitely, so because of globalization, we have contact with one another across the globe, there's this diversity of scripts is narrowing as you said. But there's still another aspect to this. You talk about being a good forger. I also try to be a good forger when I'm writing a replacement panel. I don't know how successful I am, but even if we're all writing the same script, I write primarily in an Ashkenazi script called Beit Yosef. It's the script that I was trained in. And so if someone says we would like a megillah, that's a script that I write in unless they request otherwise. But my Beit Yosef and Kevin's Beit Yosef and every other scribe's Beit Yosef even if we try to make it look like one another's, it won't exactly, because
Can you explain what that is?
That's the style of script. There are, there's a lot of style. There's a lot of different styles of script. It's a dominant Ashkenazi style of script. And if, even if we try our hardest, we can't exactly get it the same as somebody else, because it is like a fingerprint. And that is what makes every scroll totally unique, is that it was written by hand and it's written in somebody's handwriting. I can't even make the same Torah scroll that I already made, right? Because my handwriting has already shifted slightly. It has, well, hopefully improved. So yeah.
Thank you. And as I look at your name tag, could you explain what Sofer STaM actually means?
Oh yes. So STaM, Sofer and Sofer is the masculine form of the word, means writer. And what are we writers of? We're not writers of novels, although perhaps also, I don't know, Kevin, I don't write novels. But we are writers of certain religious objects that STaM is an acronym for. So it stands for Sefer Torah, the scroll of the Torah, tefillin, the phylacteries, and the M or mem stands for mezuzah. Also can include megillot, the scroll of Esther. So that's those are the sacred objects that are written by hand according to prescribed rules that we're trying to write.
Thank you so much. And Magda, I think I saw you pop up before.
So I popped up because it was a question we were talking with scribes, and it seemed like the question from the audience was actually relevant about what makes the Torah kosher, and how does one make one a Torah kosher. So reflecting on the particular examples that particular the Torahs from the Memorial Torah Scrolls Trust, but which were, as the audience member says, were really like trophies by these Nazis, right? Nazi collectors, by taking trophies of those they murdered. But I think it would be useful for the audience to understand what makes a Torah kosher, but also likewise what makes Torah not kosher. What happens with what has to happen to make a Torah not kosher? So I think that would be useful for people to understand.
I want to talk about that, but I actually would like to defer to Lois about about these scrolls' story, and rather than saying like there's what we know and then there's a myth. Lois, can I just hand it to you to address that?
So our collection took place at a time where it's really a story of heroism and a form of resistance. And there are multiple versions of the story. Some people say that the Nazis wanted to create a museum of an extinct race, although that's been debunked in recent years by historians. Another version, which is more popular right now, is that the Jewish community, in an act of sleight of hand, were able to collect the 200,000 pieces of Judaica from the Czech lands by doing the bidding of the SS officer, but expanding it and then putting everything away. And, there's another version of the story that because Hashem intervened, there were no bombs that destroyed Prague during the war. And therefore, when things were put away, they survived, as opposed to Berlin or Warsaw that were flattened in the war. And if things were in boxes in buildings, they would have been destroyed as well. So, whichever version you think about, none of them were really great conditions for Torah scrolls, which are meant to be in an ark and rolled regularly and checked by soferim and making sure that all the letters are kept up. So by the time our collection came to London in 1964, most of the scrolls were not kosher. In other words, letters were missing, the scrolls were ripped, they were burnt, parts of the scrolls didn't exist anymore. And it's only up to the Sofers to decide whether they can repair it or not. But there is a point in time where the scroll has outlived its useful life. And generally speaking, when that happens, Torah scrolls are buried in a Jewish cemetery where they're put in the geniza and then buried. Our collection, however, has had special boundaries put around it, because the actual words say that when a Torah scroll is no longer useful to the community, it should be buried. But our collection will always be useful, because even though they're not kosher to be read from by a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah or on Yom Kippur, they are serving the purpose of being a memorial and helping us remember the 6 million Jews that were murdered in the Shoah and the destruction of 2/3 of European Jewry during the war. So I'll hand it back to you, Kevin, from a pure definition of kosher or not kosher, but they're always to be used as memorials, at least our older collection.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I were to just give the most basic sense of like what's kosher is, and there's a lot more to it, but that if all of the 304,805 letters are present and legible, and they're not touching each other because the letters still have to be surrounded with white space, they're formed correctly, the Torah is structurally sound, as we say, all the rest is commentary, and many, maybe even most of those scrolls can be made kosher. And the question is, is it feasible? Is it economically feasible? But also, is it even appropriate? And I think I'm circling back to some of the questions that were put out at the very beginning about memory, that as we move farther away from what actually happened to these scrolls and to the people who were involved with them, I think that our relationship with the scrolls will change. And I've been thinking about this for years. It's my doctoral project, is to imagine as the generations pass, is it useful to the community that maybe some of these scrolls be allowed to be let go? And in this generation, I think it's an outrageous idea. We are so close still, but the scrolls, as special as they are also made of flesh. And look back in our history, we haven't held on to everything. So I'm really looking ahead, let's say 100 years. We already have scrolls that are in very poor condition, and they are so useful to the community. They're learned from, they're danced with. We learn from them in so many ways. They're still sacred Torahs. Will the nearness to the communities that are destroyed be so compelling in 2 more generations? And it's kind of hard to think about a future. I mean, both Miriam and I were very close. Both of our parents were refugees. We're lucky to escape from Germany. The Torahs at some point will be too old to be repaired and used as regular Torahs, which at this point is something we can still do. So not quite sure where I'm going, but there are already some scrolls for which, in order to make them kosher, would so fundamentally change them that that's not the task.
Although I'll chime in, it would be a very sad day for those of us at the Memorial Scrolls Trust when someone in the future made a decision that these scrolls didn't have a purpose anymore. And to that point, 150 of our Torah scrolls were too fragile in 1964 to be sent out around the world. And they sit in our museum in London.
Mm-hmm.
A few of them have been carbon dated back to 1350, 1250, 1400. And some of our scrolls, most of our scrolls are from the 1700s, 1800s. So I would challenge you, unless you're talking about the year 25, 50, we still hang on to those cherished objects from 1350. And I don't see how, even in the next few decades, there would be a reason to not at least try to maintain these scrolls, if not restore to kosher.
I actually, I don't see a reason either. And this is really an experiment, because when we think of Torah time, we go back, well, we go back thousands of years. And these Torahs are, they take their place among other Torahs written over thousands of years, in better times and in worse times. And it's really the beginning of imagining this conversation that is for future generations to have. So I am not at cross purposes at all with the trust. In fact, I just
I will jump
you're
off
so cool.
In a moment to let Katya continue, but just a technicality to make clear. So it's really based on the technicality that the Torah has to have all the letters, they have to be all properly placed. There is no other requirement. It's about the craft. I think that's where the question is coming from as well. Julie and
Julie?
I mean, there are other requirements, but those kind of have already passed with probably with the initial Sofer. I mean, there's also the requirement that it be in one piece. So if a seam is totally broken, and instead of one scroll, we have two scrolls, so that has to be sewn together. But yeah, more or less, if all the letters are intact, then yeah, we're in good shape.
We had another question here where, Louis, you mentioned how Judaism, Christianity, and Islam sort of share in some kind of reverence for Torah. And the question is, for our scribes again, do you know of any dialogues, or are there any cooperative projects where Jewish and Muslim scribes sort of get together and write sacred texts? There are some for music, but
yeah, I don't know of anything more recent. There was something maybe about a decade ago that Sofer Neil Yerman participated in. Does anyone remember what that project was called? No. I'm not aware of anything currently.
Well, two things come to mind, and one just something I was involved with. There is now I'm forgetting the name of the Bible. It was the first handwritten illuminated Bible in 500 years. Donald Jackson, who was, maybe he's retired now, but he was the calligrapher to the crown, did the calligraphy, and it was on display. And in connection with that, Arabic calligrapher and I, and then another calligrapher came and shared our craft. But I kind of pitched an idea about 10 to 15 years ago. It was in the news about threats to burn a Quran, and all hell was breaking loose. And I was at Hartford Seminary there, which is where I'm doing this project about imagining the far distant future of these scrolls. And kind of pitched the idea that, if this were to go through, and this particular scroll were to, Quran were to be destroyed, that I believe this is when my teacher Eric was still alive, that some of our students would come together, and we would, as a gift to the Muslim community, handwrite a Quran, to replace it symbolically. And we're all character, font geeks. We would love to have learned that. And the colleague said two things. One is that would be kind of weird. But the other thing that he said is that there isn't the same sense that a handwritten text has, a higher level of holiness than one that is just printed. And we have this kind of different relationship to sacred text that I don't think anyone else actually has. So it's really interesting to compare notes, but we we have this physical relationship to perpetuating our text that I don't think is actually found certainly in Islam and Christianity. Let's do it. Let's have that conference, Julie.
Great.
I love it. I'm also thinking just about the great role that, of course, calligraphy has played and still plays in Islamic culture, is both Islamic art, but also, of course, spirituality as well. So I'll be on the virtual panel discussion when you have the conference, and I'll listen.
Or we can host it at Fordham.
Or we'll have it at Fordham.
One way that I frame it is that we three Abrahamic faiths have a radically different, we share the text, and yet we have a radically different relationship. That ours is about faithfully engaging our bodies in the original text. And in Islam, how the text is written is not so crucial. It could be printed, it could be handwritten, but that there's such a focus on recitation and memorization. And then in Christian scriptures, which I find this kind of mind-blowing, it comes to the world already in translation, already modified through whatever it took to get from the Hebrew Aramaic to Greek. So these are such radical different relationships to sacred texts that it's a rich area.
Mm. Yeah. Miriam, there was another question for you. What inspired you to make this film? You've done so many varied things to do that you did.
Well, before I made this film, I had always had a client who had a budget and a deadline and an audience. I made a lot of films about teaching the arts for something called the Annenberg Channel, which was great. And I've made radio programs about Jewish holidays with Itzhak Perlman. You'll probably hear the one for the high holidays sometime next week. It's out there on public radio. But one day, Kevin was telling me about what he does restoring these scrolls, and I blithely said, "Oh, that sounds like a film." And he blithely said, "Okay," not realizing what would be involved. And so for the first time, I was my own client, which was really interesting. And I had a wonderful collaborator besides Kevin, the woman who was the principal photographer and editor of this film, Randy Cicchini. And we had different priorities. I wanted to make sure that when you watch the film, you'll understand everything about not only where these Torahs come from, but how a Torah is restored. I was really into the craft of it. And Randy was more into the spiritual level of it. That's who she is. And so she kept urging us to explore Kevin's own path and his spiritual path. But I should back up, since I said I was talking to Kevin, and let you know how I know Kevin is that we are first cousins. And when he said that our parents were refugees, they were. And here there was a picture in the film at about 3.5 minutes, this picture, and you will see his mother is the little girl and my father is the tall, just bar mitzvahed boy, and that is the week before they left Germany in 1939. So that's more about the genesis of this film.
Thank you.
Can I ask Miriam about the filmmaking? There are so many restrictions on showing certain words in the Torah, not showing certain words in media. Was that a constraint while you were working with Kevin? Or, I don't know, Kevin, if you want to talk about how you made sure that didn't happen, or maybe it did, or maybe I'm out of my here.
Lois, I'm embarrassed to admit that I didn't know that. So if we showed anything we weren't supposed to show, we'll re-edit it, I guess.
You don't need to be so embarrassed, because you and Randy were actually very sensitive to among other things, inadvertently like show or printing on the flyer a text that had the name of God on it, which is the main concern. And in other ways, you took pains to be respectful and occasionally would ask me, are you comfortable with this? And it was very, I was fascinated with the process that you two were doing, which, to see on a granular level how you are engaging with Torah. So, okay, Miriam admitted, we're cousins, and that here we are engaged in this really intensive work in our family coming out of Germany, where we were secular, around Torah is really powerful. So I kept on nudging you two about, why don't you tell the story of your experience in engaging in Torah in this way? But your sensitivity to that question was sewn into your craft.
Glad to hear.
That was not a got you question, Miriam, so I apologize. It felt that way. And I'm also curious if there was a particular blooper during filming that you two still laugh about at the Thanksgiving table.
Oh, gosh. Well, poor Kevin, I made him repeat things so many times. You think of a documentary as fly on the wall. Well, it's not. So if he said something in an interview, and I mean, I can tell in an interview whether something's going to work or not, I would make him repeat it until he got it emotionally right, or whatever. And we were so close to him. I mean, I was always afraid that the camera would, touch the parchment, but it didn't. We were like, the camera is here over his shoulder. I'm trying to remember bloopers. I don't know, but I will tell you that there's something, the film was 23 minutes long, and I can't even remember, something like 17 hours of footage. So to get it down to the 23 minutes, there was a lot that didn't get in there. And there were things that didn't get in, like interviews with, particularly interviews with the members of the congregation at the retirement community. There was this man who talked about the special feeling he had when he held this Torah. The people there were so proud of their scroll and so identified with it. And I guess, people really love that moment when Carolyn, the 10-year-old, says she wants to use the Torah at her bat mitzvah. The very old lady, Frida, who is in there, she reminds me of my own grandparents, and to my sorrow, we didn't finish the film before she died, because she was very identified with it, and I would have loved to show it to her.
Katya, we can't hear you. No. Okay, so I'll come to the rescue with Katya losing her sound, not her voice, but her sound. And I just want to say that thank you so much for joining us and for telling the story of really the Jewish life through the Torah, the continuity. And I really loved the way, I think, Louis, you said that the scrolls as survivors and connecting communities, throughout centuries, and the transmission of the materiality of that message and creating it. So I think I thank you all so much. Thank you, Miriam, for the beautiful film. Thank you, Lois, for what you do to preserve these historic Torahs. Thank you, Kevin and Julie, for continuing the tradition, either through restoration or through creating new Torah scrolls that will have to be restored 250 years from now. And I hope that we'll gather again together and maybe learn more about the craft. I actually, as I wrap up, I want to say that I did buy quills for my students to experience writing with quills when we were talking about manuscript culture versus print culture. So we have some gall ink and walnut ink and quills at Fordham, and we'd be happy to see you do better than we did with scribbling of literally like chickens on our paper. So thank you so much. It was a beautiful film, and I hope we will regather together. And I thank everybody who came to us, and I hope you'll join us on Monday for our last event before the high holidays, celebrating a different way of Jewish culture through arts. So thank you all, and thank you, Katya, for hosting it, even as you lose the sound. Who knows? Technology, right?
One of the things we say this month leading up to Rosh Hashanah is ketiva tova, means you should be well written for good. So
right.
In the book of life. So we should all be well written.
That's right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shana Tova.
Thank you.
Shana Tova.
Bye-bye.